Kofiak. I think this is a first in the history of this podcast. We are shooting live on a weekday in the afternoon. So the vibes are high, I would say. The vibes are even higher because the new college football game is out, and I'm very happy about that. Um, Clinton, I know you haven't played it yet, sir, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm looking forward to talking some Michigan Wolverines. As you said, I think we've done one other Monday episode. I think it might have been our first ever, but it was because it was a holiday. So a non-holiday Monday episode. We are finally live for the show. Excited to have Clayton here joining us to talk some Michigan Wolverines. Clayton, how are you?
I'm doing well. Great to be here. Sorry to make you guys do this on a Monday or
Oh no, this
you're
is
welcome.
great.
Either way,
This
depends on how you look at it. Okay.
yes,
Good.
this
And
works out.
yeah, huge day with the college football video game coming out. I got mine downloading right now. I had to pay I guess I got $10 off, $89.99 for the
Oh.
deluxe edition. But 3 days, I mean, 3 days early, you got to do it, I guess, if you're a diehard. And then I pretend I'm going to have so much time to play it, and then I won't play it that much. But that's a problem for future me, I guess.
Yeah,
That's
no,
right.
I texted my buddy and I texted him a picture of it. He's like, yeah, stupid me. I paid the extra to pre-order the game and get it early, and I'm out of town until Saturday, so that was kind of
Oh.
useless on my part. No,
He
it's
gets his college Ultimate Team tokens, so get those if he plays
yeah.
that.
One of my friends at work asked me, he's like, "You playing College Ultimate Team first?" I'm like, "If you ever say those words again to me, I'm gonna smack you upside the head." So yes, everyone, we are continuing with our summer/fall previews, whatever you want to call them. We are talking the Michigan Wolverines today. We have Clayton Sayfie from On Three. What's the nomenclature on that? Is it the On Three Sports Network, or how are you guys breaking that down now with the Rivals merger?
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but it's the On3 network. Rivals is the national recruiting arm of On3 now. Shannon Terry, the genius behind a lot of these recruiting sites, started it back in I think 2000 or something like that. Ends up
Mhm.
buying it back 20 some years later. But yeah, On3 network. Rivals is kind of the recruiting arm, and On3 is kind of the fan site and national transfer portal college sports type of arm of On3.
Gotcha. So that's good to know. I think this is also a first time that we have had the same publication but different people on because we had Anthony Broom join us last summer to do the same thing for us.
Ah,
So
okay.
you guys
He's my
are
guy.
you
Yeah.
guys have officially expanded our the Wolverine repertoire to two on this show. So we appreciate that a lot.
Love it.
Clinton, I know you're fired up about this episode. Big Michigan fan over there.
I love those Michigan Wolverines after they damn near ruined my Ohio State football season last year. No, I'm looking forward to this team. Obviously, we're going to dive into it. It feels, I think it feels different for this team this year. There's a little more known now that Sherrone's there, and there's some exciting pieces, and we'll get to that here in a second with Clayton. Guys, if you are joining us live at 2:30 on a Monday, thank you very much. If you're not, you can always find our live feeds, ITP CFB. All you got to do is search that in YouTube. Make sure you hit like and subscribe there so you get notified anytime we go live. And if you can't catch us live, you can always check us out next morning anywhere you can get a podcast, Spotify, Apple, Amazon. We are there. Just search Inside the Pylon Midwest College Football Podcast. And then please follow us on the socials of X and Instagram. All you have to do is search ITPCFB. Ryan, back to you for our sound. Let's see if Clayton enjoys this one.
Hey, those mountains blue? It's Inside the Pylon's six-pack of questions.
It's too early to crack a beer, right?
That's why I'm drinking an ice cold water.
I appreciate the head nod. I appreciate the head nod. So Michigan was a fascinating watch for me last season, not just because of my employer and proximity to the stadium, but it feels maybe it's not rare because of how I guess that it's happened a handful of times now in the last like 4 years, but it feels rare for a blue blood program to lose a head coach in a period of success, right? We're not talking about Texas firing Tom Herman because he was not a good fit or good football coach or whatever. We're talking about a team that won the national title and then their coach went to the NFL. And I mean, that happens when you're a successful program, especially a guy like Jim Harbaugh who has NFL aspirations. He wants to win a Super Bowl. He's had success in the NFL before, but for me, when I look at a situation like that, it almost creates a false sense of expectations that are probably a little bit unfair to the guy who's taking over. And I feel like that was probably a little true for Sherrone last year. You're looking preseason and you're seeing people who are purported experts of college football who are making these preseason playoff predictions, and Michigan is smack dab in the middle of those. And I'm sitting there looking at those. I'm like, okay, I get there's a lot of talent on defense, and I get that, this was the continuity hire. The culture should stay intact despite the. I mean, there was a lot of coaching losses from that, just not from Harbaugh. You had to replace almost the entire defensive staff, but there's a lot that you had to be replaced on the offensive line. Had to replace the quarterback, had to replace receivers, had to replace arguably the best running back in college football history. And, they struggled a little bit on offense last year. And I know the question Clinton sent you was a little more offense oriented, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on the totality of the year one of the Sherrone Moore era, because there were certainly some rough patches as you go through it, but then the season ends about as good as can be expected. You beat Ohio State again. You beat a full-strength Alabama team in the bowl game. Oh, and by the way, the recruiting apparatus of Michigan fully came out there towards the end of the season as well.
Yeah, it was kind of a wild ride, and it kind of went dissimilar to so many Michigan seasons in recent history, because for so long under Jim Harbaugh, they would win all the games they were supposed to, but they had trouble beating Ohio State. They had trouble winning some of their bowl games. And then, of course, they get over the hump in a lot of those areas. They go on an incredible 3-year run where they go 40-3. They win the national championship. And then the next year, as you said, right, a new guy takes over, and they lost some games they probably should have won, but they won some games they probably should have lost. The exact opposite of what we saw early on in Harbaugh's tenure, and really a lot of this century. So, they were 5-5 heading into Northwestern game on senior day, and chasing a bowl bid, and then a couple weeks later, a week later, they're planting a flag at Ohio State's midfield, and Jack Sawyer's in tears, not because of pepper spray, but he was crying and looked like he had some sort of rage there, had some sort of issue. But it's amazing how the end of that season, gave him, Sherrone Moore, a little bit of grace, and that includes the Alabama win in the bowl game. The recruiting run, as you mentioned, at the end of the year as well, that included landing Bryce Underwood, gave people hope for the future and what the roster is going to look like. So yeah, it was, a season where you pretty much played with one arm tied behind your back because you didn't have an offense in a lot of games. They won 4 games with less than 100 yards passing. It's almost unheard of. USC, Ohio State, maybe Alabama. So just things that you didn't think you would necessarily see. And I remember at this time last year, people were asking us, we do a Q&A podcast over at the Wolverine, and it was, well, if we have Iowa's offense, how good could we be? And we were like, they're not going to be as bad on offense as Iowa. It's like, no, they were worse. They were much worse. And, that held them back in a lot of ways, because you have no margin for error, really, when you can't put up points. But it also, you have to credit Sherrone Moore and the coaching staff for figuring out a way to win games despite that limitation at the end of the season.
Well, and I think the mark of a good head coach is looking at what went wrong and addressing it before it becomes, a 5-bell fire alarm fire, whatever the saying goes. And we'll start kind of officially question one, talking about that offense. And the running game maybe was not as explosive as it was the previous year, but that kind of builds off the fact that there was not a functional passing game. So you get a new offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey, coming in from North Carolina. A big coup, I think. I'm a big fan of his. What can we expect in terms of an offensive scheme and identity from him in 2025?
It was a really interesting hire because he didn't bring a single person with him from North Carolina, and that was intentional, because I think Michigan wanted to keep some continuity on the coaching staff going into year 2 after there was so much change a year ago with new coaches coming in. You mentioned it at the top with the entirely new defensive staff, but there were changes to the offensive staff. Sherrone Moore was the offensive coordinator. Then he was promoted to the head coach. So they wanted the continuity, but they also wanted somebody who could run something similar to what Michigan has had success with in the recent past. And Chip Lindsey, I think, kind of wanted to blend some of the things he brings to the table in the pass game and the run game with what Michigan's been good at under, with Sherrone Moore on staff, much of the Jim Harbaugh era as well. So it's going to be fascinating. They've been very, very tight-lipped as to what the differences are going to be, but you can get bits and pieces from players who talk about a little bit more 11 personnel, which is, 3 wide receivers, tight end, and running back, as opposed to 2 tight ends on the field. They talk about, involving the running backs in the pass game a little bit more, maybe some more screen passes. and use the entire field. And then they talk about what's going to be more explosive. And no offensive coordinator is going to come in and say, we're going to be less explosive, but we're going to move the chains. And, just like no defensive coordinator would ever say, we're not going to be aggressive. We're going to be conservative. We're going to be reactive. So it's hard to say when you talk to these guys in the spring and summer, but I think a lot of the potential explosion of this offense is going to revolve around improved quarterback play. I mean, that it's going to be better. No matter how much better it's going to be better because it was so bad last season. They had 3 different guys start games. Jack Tuttle started a game and then retired from football the next week. I mean, it was pretty much a disaster at that spot. And then even in the bowl game, they somehow find a way to hang on after Davis Warren went down. Alex Orji, who was in the transfer portal, came in and essentially just tried to run out the clock and punt. And he even threw an interception. So that's going to be improved. And the personnel is going to allow you to take more shots downfield. So I'm a little skeptical that it's just going to be Chip Lindsey is the only difference in having, a pass play of 40-plus yards. They were the only team in the country last year to not have one of those. But at the same time, I do think he's had a good track record. He helped develop Drake May at North Carolina. Jarrett Stidham turned him into a draft pick in his past as well. So I think Bryce Underwood should be, and it sounds like he is, very excited to continue working with him heading into their first season. But I'm sure we'll get into the quarterback in a little bit. But a lot of it's going to ride on how good he can be early on because they have some tough games.
Well, that is a perfect segue into question 2. 5-star phenom, as everyone knows, Bryce Underwood enters the fold for Michigan 2025. And, I'm looking through things trying to describe it. And I feel like the word or the idiom, sky's the limit, fits him to a T because the expected amount of talent that he has. If you talk to some of the people, being some of my coworkers here in Columbus, he didn't play that good a competition. He's not going to be that good. I'm like, okay, guys, whatever. He's a 5-star for a reason. So what should we, as Big Ten fans, look to expect from Bryce in 2025? Is it a day one starter? Kind of what are his best on-field qualities that he can bring to this Michigan team?
I think he's going to start right away for a couple of reasons. One, the physical tools and, the fact that he is the number 1 overall recruit in the country, kind of speaks for itself a little bit. Like if you line him up next to other guys in drills, and you get to see some of this when they, he was with the team preparing for the Alabama bowl game last year. There's just such a difference between what he can do physically and what other guys can do. Now, a lot more goes into the position, I know, but I think that's a good baseline to start with. And then secondly, Mikey Keene, the guy they brought in to compete with him, was banged up in the spring. He was set back a little bit. We'll see when he gets fully healthy. I think that Bryce Underwood taking the majority of the first team reps in the spring helped give him a pretty nice leg up here. But it's hard to say what exactly to expect from a freshman quarterback like this. We haven't seen it at Michigan really since Tate Forcier, but he didn't have a lot around him. You expect Bryce to have more than that. And then Chad Henne had a lot more around him, maybe wasn't as dynamic, but did a great job as a true freshman. So it's hard to compare it to something. I think the hope is that he's freshman year Trevor Lawrence from 2017 or whatever it was. You can't necessarily expect it, though. And early in the year, they're going to go at Oklahoma less than a month after he turns 18 years old. That's going to be a nice reality check for him. And if he can fare well in that environment, then I expect him to just kind of continue to accelerate and take those leaps throughout the season. If he takes his lumps a little bit, I would expect him to improve throughout the year as well. But maybe you adjust expectations a little bit. So, he's got a big arm. He's accurate. From what you hear, he works really hard on, learning what defenses are trying to do, picking up Michigan's offense in the first year under Chip Lindsey. And then he can run, too. He's very mobile. I think it's probably the most underrated part of his game is that he's going to extend plays. He's going to run on design runs. He's going to be able to scramble and move the chains as well. So it's not going to be, he might not be a top 10, 20, 30 quarterback in the country. I think he could easily be in that range. But let's say he's not. It's still not going to be an easy guy to defend because I think he can do so much with that athleticism.
Yeah, whenever you hear the Cam Newton comparisons as far as playing style, that's certainly a positive. I like the Trevor Lawrence comparison, though. That's an interesting one because, both highly rated guys. But if I remember correctly, I don't think he started the season in 2018. I think it was still a Kelly Bryant squad for
You're right.
4 or 5 games. So how much did the Mikey Keene injury kind of throw a wrench in the overall planning? If you were able to get any sorts of sense for that going through the spring, was the plan kind of, bring this experienced guy in, let him kind of take the reins early, take some lumps if needed, or was it kind of always just a quarterback insurance plan, and the plan was always going to be to start Bryce regardless?
I think it was going to be a true competition, and still could be in fall camp. We'll
Mhm.
see if he's healthy or not. I guess he was slated to start throwing in June, and be healthy. We'll see if he's cleared for fall camp. We'll learn more at the end of the month here from Sherrone Moore in Las Vegas, Big Ten country, at Media Day. But so I think it was set to be a true competition. And what bringing in Mikey Keene does is a couple things. One is it takes a little bit of pressure off of Bryce Underwood because, he can just kind of grow throughout the offseason, go on his own time. And not that they're not going to push him, but would give you a nice fallback option that if he's not ready to start or be the only guy at quarterback that plays early in the year, you could have somebody else that's a viable option. And two, to help mentor him, to understand the offense, help teach him the offense. Mikey Keene played for Chip Lindsey, the new offensive coordinator at UCF back in 2022. So those two have a good relationship. He knows what the offensive coordinator is looking for, what the system is supposed to look like. So I think that was the idea around it. Now, Davis Warren got hurt in the bowl game. We'll see when he's fully healthy. Could be September, October. It's total guess based on the math of looking at typical ACL injuries. Uh, Alex Orji leaves for the transfer portal. Jaden Denegal leaves for the transfer portal. You have 4 quarterbacks that were there in the spring. 2 of them were hurt. Only one of them, Mikey Keene, has taken snaps in college football or thrown a pass in college football, excuse me. And they were all at the group of 5 level. They bring in Jake Garcia, who's a transfer who started at Miami, played at Missouri, played at East Carolina. After the spring, just several weeks ago, I think just for another body because you just need some depth there in case something happens. And maybe the injury to Keene in the spring was a little bit of a wake-up call of, okay, we only have 2 healthy guys right now. We need to bring in somebody else. So, I think it threw a wrench in their plans a little bit. But I was, and this is just a projection, but I was always kind of in the camp that it was going to be Underwood to start anyway, and maybe both of them would play. So who knows? I think that they were banking on a competition, and they didn't get that in the spring. And you hope Keene gets healthy enough so they can have that in fall camp.
The other aspect to the offense is out wide. Certainly, we know what Michigan has coming back at the running back position, and we got actually a lot of it in the bowl game because the starting running backs on both teams are now playing for Michigan in that game. But I wanted to talk about the guys who will be primarily catching the football, whether it be from Bryce Underwood or Mikey Keene or someone else in 2025. The key guy out wide, in tight, however you want to phrase it, was Colston Loveland last year. He's now a Chicago Bear. What can we expect from a wide receiver room that wasn't the best last year? And I don't know that it really got a ton better, at least from the portal. Big 4-star freshman Andrew Marsh comes in, but are there any other names to know or guys that you're looking to take a step forward this year?
Yeah, I agree with that assessment on what they did in the transfer portal. They added a couple guys, but it wasn't those splash moves that maybe you would have thought. And maybe it takes a year for them to get that. I think if Bryce Underwood shows out this year,
Mm-hmm.
or at least shows to be very promising this season, it might be a little bit easier to convince teams that, convince players that this team's going to throw the ball more, that they have a great quarterback that can help boost you, right? Whether it's NFL draft prospect, NIL money, whatever you're looking for, production at the college level. So, maybe they're a few months away because the portal in December we'll probably see them add some wide receivers. But the number one name that keeps coming up is Donovan McCulley. Bigger bodied receiver who transferred in from Indiana, was hurt at the beginning of the last season, decided to shut it down and preserve his redshirt year and keep a year of eligibility so he could play when he was healthy now in 2025. And he had, an interesting career, converted quarterback who actually started a game at quarterback at the Big House against Michigan. And in 2021, he said the thing he remembers the most about it was David Ajabo and Aiden Hutchinson chasing after him all game, which sounds terrible. And it was rough for them in that game at the Big House. But that was a 3-win team. I believe that year it was a 3-win team a couple years later when he was one of their leading receivers. He's somebody that it sounds like is going to be the lead dog in that room, but has had kind of an up and down odd career because he's had to adjust to the position and then ended up not playing last season. Now, you still have most of your receivers back. outside of Tyler Morris, who transferred to Indiana, a little bit of a trade there. Frederick Moore showed some good things in the bowl game against Alabama, nice touchdown catch. Samaj Morgan has been more of a gadget player in the past, screen passes, bubble screens. That didn't jet sweeps that didn't really work last year because when he was in, you knew exactly what they were going to do. They had no threat of doing anything else. So if guys improve around him and they are able to use more parts of the field, I think he could get back to being productive in that role. I think he averaged like 5 yards a catch last year, which is extremely low. So there's still some talent there. You mentioned Andrew Marsh as a freshman. Jamar Browder's another name that came up a lot in the spring. He's 6'4", 6'5", a receiver who they were able to flip late from NC State. So there are some options out there, but it's majority the same cast. I do think the wide receivers were not very good last year, but they were held back by the quarterback. So not to bring everything back to quarterback play, but once that improves, I think that the receivers have a much, much higher ceiling.
And now we kind of take a look at the defense. And again, we'll get to the DBs, but that defensive line has been something that has given people fits for years with Michigan. You already mentioned Ajabo, Hutchinson. Why am I blanking on his name? Chris Jenkins, who's now on my Bengals, or has been on my Bengals for his second year, hoping for a big year out of him. But Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, first-round picks, Josiah Stewart, they were all stalwarts for that 2024 Michigan defensive line. Who should we have our eyes on in 2025 as they look to replace or kind of fill in for those 3 stars who are now gone?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to keep it with the theme of the video game coming out today, I was just looking at it, and Derek Moore, who's a senior edge rusher now, is 91 overall in the game, top 100 in the game, and I think that's pretty accurate. He's somebody who only had 4 sacks last year. 2 of them came in the bowl game, but he had, I think, 6 the year before, and actually had the same amount of pressures as Josiah Stewart last season. So he's been productive. He is proven. I think he's ready to break out to an even another level as an edge rusher. And then TJ Guy on the other side, actually with 5.5 half sacks last season as kind of a spot starter when guys were hurt and a primary backup who rotated in. He's ready to break out even more as well. And he's been productive. If you look at his sacks per snap and pressures per snap, I mean, it's high. So he's been around. He's a 5th-year senior. Now, is it going to be Josiah Stewart, where you have a first-team All-Big Ten type of guy there, top 100 NFL draft pick? I'm not exactly sure if it's going to be that dynamic. And it's certainly not going to be as dynamic on the inside either at defensive tackle. But they feel like they're mitigating the losses of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham by adding more depth. They bring in 2 veteran transfers, Trey Williams from Clemson, Damon Payne from Alabama, who add to that room. And then another guy who's in that top 100 of the video game, I believe 92 overall, is Rayshawn Benny, who is a guy that you may not know about if you're not a Michigan fan yet. Although if you're a fan of other teams, you've seen him make some big plays in the past. This guy's been waiting behind Chris Jenkins, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. When he was a freshman, Mozzie Smith was there. Actually, I think his sophomore year as well. And he learned from those guys. He was earning time alongside those guys, which speaks volumes about what he can do. I'm expecting a huge year out of him. So you do have a potential star in there, but you have more depth. They're going to roll, they say, 6 guys through that position group to keep 6 players of 296 plus pounds fresh, which, maybe you come at them in waves a little bit more. And then you have to mention, too, behind them, you have 2 linebackers on the inside that are coming back and that started last season. So in 2021, when they lost Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, they didn't replace them with guys of that caliber, yet they still had a very, very good front 7 that was comparable to the year before. What they did was they got better at defensive tackle, and they got better at linebacker, and the secondary was better, and that helps you too. So you can't replace Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, but if you get better around them, you have the depth that we just talked about with the 6 guys cycling through. I think your front 7 can be similar. Maybe not with the upside where you can have one guy take over a game like they did, like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant did at Ohio State, but you can still be very stout, and there's a lot of promise. I know we'll talk about the secondary as well, but those guys will help them out too.
Do you get
Ryan, hold on. Before you get there, Ryan, I wanted to give Michigan a good compliment here, how relevant it was to real life to video game. My son asked me yesterday, he says, Daddy, he's 5 years old. He says, can I try your college football game? I'm like, sure, buddy. Give it a shot. There's a lot of buttons. He's a big Crash Team Racing player, and he loves that game. So we have a lot of fun with that. So I'm like, we'll go into practice mode, and you can just do offense only. So he's doing okay. He's learning to run. He's passing the ball. And he was getting near the end. I was like, why don't we throw a defense out there? And I have not done practice mode at all on the game. So it throws an opposing team out there, not the Ohio State defense. So it's Michigan's defense. And so we set this up. He does a few passes, nails them, does good. I'm like, all right, let's do a few run plays. And just like it did in Columbus in late November, Mason Graham just ate. It was Seth McLaughlin. I know he's injured for the game, but he ate up the center and was in the backfield every time this poor kid tried to run the ball. And that just brought such bad flashbacks for me. And I was like, oh my God, he wrecked us in real life, and now he's wrecking me in the game. He did get one juke on him and made it past him. But other than that, he had like 5 tackles for loss on my son who's trying to learn this game. So I just thought that was a fun piece of input there. He wrecked us in real life, and he wrecks you on the video game.
Why do you have to pass your generational trauma onto your son like that?
I don't know. I mean, he's a Bengals fan, too, so the poor kid's just glutton for punishment. I mean, he's – and, we're Guardians fans, and the Detroit Tigers just spanked our ass this past weekend. So Michigan is just ruining my parade. We do get the Lions this year, and so maybe Joe Burrow will have an offensive line in front of him, and we can do some work and get something back there. Yeah. Al Golden, listen, I'm putting a lot of faith in Al Golden. He did a lot with the young guys who were unproven and coming off injuries last year for Notre Dame. These are all NFL caliber guys. Like, I'm hoping he can get something out of the youth that the Bengals have developed, because Lou Anarumo did not do a good job with that. So, hope springs eternal. So here we are, July. I'm thinking confident.
Well, as an Ohio State fan, you got to love Al Golden for his play call on the Jeremiah Smith deep ball, I would imagine.
Yes, that was I got a little squirmy in that game. I'm not going to lie, and I love Ryan. Ryan is our Notre Dame fan, so how fitting you have both of us on this episode with Michigan. When Ohio State beat Texas,
I didn't realize that. I'm sorry.
When Ohio State beat Texas, and this is not trying to be overconfident, I did not think Notre Dame had a chance to win that game. With the horses Ohio State had and the injuries that Notre Dame had, it just doesn't seem set up well for them. And as nervous as I'd say I got a little nervous at the second half. I'm glad the game got close and competitive. It made for a more fun, interactive national championship. And I know Ryan was miserable in the first half, because when Judkins scored, I believe it was Judkins, right in the second half to open up, I think Ryan was ready to turn the TV off. Yeah, and then all of a sudden, who was it? Fowler makes the comment that Ohio State and Ibuka never fumbles the ball, and then he fumbles, and I'm just like, dear God, here it comes. If this choke city happens here, we're never going to hear the end of it.
Clinton, I lived through the Tyrone Willingham years. There's nothing that will get me to turn a Notre Dame game off other than the 2016 season. That I turned a couple of those November games off. But your Al Golden point was a good one there, Clinton, because I think before you ask him about the secondary, I did want to kind of ask big picture about Wink Martindale. I feel like the NFL coordinator to college with minimal to no college coaching experience goes one of two ways. It's either a flame out or it's a raging success. And it was a pretty big success for Michigan last year. Now that, especially in the front seven, you may not have the same frontline guys back, but you have a really good linebacking core. You have good depth on that front four with guys who have shown that they can make plays. Do you get a sense for any schematic changes or any new wrinkles that he might want to add to the defense in year 2?
Yeah, he's probably going to have to get a little more creative, because you may not be able to control the line of scrimmage quite the way you did last season. So I'm sure that they'll add a little bit more. I remember, Jesse Minter coming in 2022. They added and added some wrinkles a lot going into his second year in 2023. But more than anything, I think just the familiarity between him, the defensive staff that they brought in, and the players has grown. They were learning everyone's names a year ago at that time. And back in the spring ball, and now they were able to hit the ground running a little bit more. So I think that helps. But yeah, it was a weird year in a certain respect, when you look at Michigan's defense last season, because they were a little bit up and down throughout the beginning portion of the season. And then around, just over halfway, they really turned it on. And that was even with Will Johnson hurt in the back end. So they were able to figure some things out. The players communicated a little bit better. And Wink Martindale figured out what calls worked, what calls didn't, maybe in college football. And I think all of that stuff carries over to next season. So I think that, there was a time when there were a lot of Michigan fans frustrated with Wink Martindale last season. But by the end, he was the absolute man and did a heck of a job. And you got to give him a ton of credit.
Well, you bring up Will Johnson, another superstar piece on this Michigan defense. I was baffled he fell to the second round in the NFL draft. So they lose all Big Ten corner, and I believe All-American Will Johnson from the defensive back room. who's kind of the next man up in the corner room? And then how will the return of Rod Moore impact the back line of this defense in 2025?
The next man up at corner is a huge question. I think they lack a little bit of depth there. They lack probably that number one alpha type of guy at that position. Zeke Berry really came on at the end of last season, began the year as a starting nickel. And since Will Johnson got hurt, their best option was to move him to outside corner, move a safety down to nickel, get a bigger body, a little more length at the nickel spot, and let Zeke Berry play on an island. He really hadn't practiced much of that coming into midway through the season. So he did a pretty good job. He's going to start there. Jair Hill is a junior now, redshirt sophomore, who had kind of an up and down season last year, made some really, really awesome plays, and then had some times where he got burned and maybe didn't play the ball as well as he could have. So those two look like your starting corners. They didn't really land that big time transfer portal corner that I think they probably wanted to, and they don't have a ton of depth, as I mentioned. But that transitions to your next portion of that question, which was how is Rod Moore going to impact the back line of the defense? But it's not just him. Their safety position I would rate is probably the best on the team if you separated safety and corner and put out a list of the position groups. They have not just Rod Moore, who we'll see how healthy he is by the start of the season, coming off of an ACL injury that ended up requiring 2 different surgeries.
Oof.
But Brandon Hillman, who was kind of a breakout player at different times last season. Mason Curtis entering his sophomore year, a 6'5" safety who moves way better than you would expect someone at that height to be able to. And the back end actually came into the program as an edge rusher, and now he's all the way back on the back line. Is a really good athlete. And they brought in TJ Metcalf from Arkansas, who was a starter in the SEC last year, had a few interceptions, made a lot of plays on the ball, made a lot of tackles, has experience. He has been, I think, better than they even thought he was going to be. So you have those 3 guys plus Rod Moore and a versatile group of nickels who can come in and play there. I think we'll see multiple guys play that position. So it's not just again, replacing Will Johnson. I think it's what's around him, and good safeties and great safeties help out corners. A great defensive line helps out corners. I think they could have those 2 things, and then you just hope you stay healthy, because DBs go down a lot, and there aren't a ton of bodies that I think you feel super comfortable with at this point. But they do have some young guys that I think could be promising by the end of the year if you need to bring them in. Shamari Earls is a high 4-star kid who came in and really impressed in the spring, so he could be someone they go to at some point.
Did you guys ever get an on-the-record sense of what happened with Rod Moore's recovery? Because I remember when the injury happened, the initial thought was, hey, there's a chance that, if everything goes right, he hits his benchmarks, he could be ready for Ohio State. And then I don't remember if it was you or Broom posting a video of him running for the first time, and it was in like April, and I'm like, or March, or it was sometime in the spring. I'm like, what? Because I wasn't paying too much attention to it last year. I'm like, what happened here?
Yeah, so nothing detailed as to what exactly happened, but I think, from what you heard, just setbacks in the recovery. And I think he said at one point last fall, I was supposed to start running, but we're getting that figured out. And then, it came to kind of a surprise to me. I believe that was in May when he posted that video. And, to see that he hadn't run on ground in 14 months. Now, it sounds like the recovery has gone pretty well since he's been able to do that. But that's tough. It's not like you're, just when you're 100% healthy, doesn't necessarily mean you're ready to come into a football game and play at your best. So, and we actually saw that with Rod Moore a couple of years ago. They kind of eased him into the season in 2023, ended up having a huge year at the end of the year, but he was coming off a knee injury at that point too. So, and whenever he's 100%, I would still think you need a little time to get back in the groove of things, because he hasn't played competitive football since the national championship game.
Yeah, you see the timelines for ACLs, and I think Adrian Peterson coming back in 6 months warped everyone's perception on what's real with that, because 9 months is like, that's the soonest your surgeon's realistically going to clear you. And then after that, it's like, well, then you have some time that you need to build up to get back into football shape, because not just jumping, running, cutting, strength training like that is going to help you too much with that. And
it's still, Ryan and I are both physical therapists, and still with my young athletes, it's, Doc says I can be back at 6 months. I'm like, no, that is pushing it, man. I would. We have different things where we can test with our strength test and give us a good measure, but the healing time never changes. And I think that's the thing that people outside the medical field don't understand is I can get your squad as strong as we want, but if we're not at that certain time frame for healing, every month before 9 months is like a 10% increased risk you're going to re-tear your ACL. So it gets really scary for me on the PT side when my athlete walks in and says, "Yeah, I'm at 4 months. Doc says I'll be ready to go back to volleyball or football at 6 months," and I'm like, "Oh no, we're not even close to that right now." Like, ugh. And then when Adrian Peterson was prime, I'm sure that's what every kid was shooting for. Kyle Schwarber did it in the 2016 World Series against the Guardians. Came back, he was 6 months and played 6-7 months, and I'm just like, gotta let it heal, man. And it's hard because these kids now in college, they have NIL that's there, money and the commitments, and especially in the NFL, there's so much pressure for them to be back on the field, especially if it's a guy who is not like a superstar player. If he's right on that potential cut line, it's like, I gotta be back. But it's a fine line to balance is what I'm getting at there.
Thank you for that, Dr. Clinton. To wrap us up here, Clayton, we'll get back to the football. Last question just kind of centers on expectations for the season. I don't like telling other fan bases, well, this is what your expectation for me, because that's not my place. You guys know your teams better. You are obviously spending a lot of time around this team, covering this team. What you've been able to gather through interviews, any practice observations, off the record talks with people within the program through the spring, what would constitute, in your opinion, a successful season for Michigan in 2025? Are we talking about in the playoff conversation, back in the playoff, contending for a Big Ten title, just beating Ohio State again and showing that you've got the quarterback of the future situation figured out? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Yeah, it's one of those things I almost find funny sometimes when you're going into a college football season. Everything's going to go according to plan for every team out there. Every team is going to win 2 more games than they did the year before. Every team's going to stay healthy. You're going to beat your rivals. And, there are about 25 teams that say every year we should be in the playoff. Well, there's only 12 spots, so the math doesn't always add up. And, previously it was only 4 spots, and you had a lot of programs and fan bases saying that. So I say that to say, I think Michigan would look at this, and I would look at it as a successful season if they find themselves in that 12-team playoff. It gives you a shot, right? As a Notre Dame fan, like getting in gives you an opportunity. You play Georgia. I mean, not to take anything away from Notre Dame, but quarterback's hurt in that game, gave him a little bit more of an edge. I think Notre Dame still wins the game either way.
For sure. Yep.
Awesome. But anything can happen now in this age because the talent is more spread out. There's more parity. So you get a break or two, and like Penn State with their draw last season, and next thing you know, you're in the CFP semifinals. Even though, the teams you beat to get there, it wasn't that impressive, but there's a little bit of heat off of James Franklin now. I know there's a ton of pressure coming into the season, but it's different pressure than it was in the 4-team era. So I think if you can get in the dance, that is a huge step for Michigan after what was kind of a disappointing season last year, and especially because the guy who's the face of your program right now, Bryce Underwood, has 2 more years that he's going to play, or 3 more years of eligibility. But you assume he goes after his junior year if things go according to plan, which, of course, we can't always bank on. But so if they get in next year and you're thinking about the way they're recruiting, you would think they would have a hell of a shot of getting back there next season. So inside the program, I wouldn't expect them to say anything different than beat your rivals, win the Big Ten, win the national championship. Those are the goals. That's the standard. That's the expectation. I would say, me personally, I care a little bit less about winning the Big Ten now. I think Ohio State fans can agree with that after the way their season played out last year. I think Oregon fans feel the same way. You win that game over Penn State and Indy, you get a worse draw than Penn State. So I know they changed the seeding this year, but it's just one example of really it's how you play in late December and January. Sure. And giving yourself an opportunity to get in those spots. So if that means 10-2, that means 10-2, and you give yourselves a shot. So long-winded way of saying, I think success is playoff. I think you feel okay about things if you're 1 win away from the playoff. And anything less than that, I think, is a disappointment. But you're still safe, I think, if you're Sherrone Moore at 8-4, maybe at 7-5. That would be 7-5 would be close to a disaster. But I think you'd still feel okay given the way you're recruiting and that you have Bryce Underwood coming back. But I think success is 12-team playoff, and it doesn't mean you have to beat your rivals, or at least you got to beat 1 or 2 of them, maybe if you're Michigan, but because you have so many. But doesn't mean you have to win the Big Ten. You just got to get in and give yourself a chance.
Well, this is such a fascinating schedule for Michigan, too, whereas you kind of looked at it last year and with what they lost and what was on the schedule with, people were thinking Texas was going to be a playoff team. People were thinking Oregon was going to be a playoff team. People were thinking Ohio State was going to be a playoff team. And I mean, that was all right. So you're looking at it and you're like, well, that's going to be 3 tough wins for Michigan to garner, and go figure they end up getting one of them. But I don't think people also thought that Indiana would have the best season in program history and Illinois would come out of nowhere. But then you look at Michigan this year. I mean, you get the tough game at Oklahoma to start, but also what exactly has Oklahoma shown under Brent Venables that makes you think that they deserve any sort of the benefit of the doubt, other than unless you're putting all your chips in the Ben Arbuckle, John Mateer basket? But it's a pretty favorable Big Ten draw this year for Michigan, all things considered. At Nebraska might be tough given it's year 3 of Matt Rule, but again, what has he shown that demonstrates he deserves any benefit of the doubt? Wisconsin hasn't been great under Lute Fickell. USC keeps finding ways to lose games. Washington was a completely different team away from home last year than they were at home. And then the 4 weeks heading into Ohio State, you have a bye, and depending on how you feel about Michigan State, it's arguably the 4 worst teams in the Big Ten. So if you're sitting here telling me that Michigan is 10-1 going into Ohio State, I mean, I don't know that I'd bet on it. That's a pretty big leap, but also you don't really have to squint that hard to see how that could play out.
No, you don't. And I think a lot of it depends on what they do at Oklahoma. It gives you a little bit of a buffer if you win that game. If you lose it, your margin kind of goes away, and then 10-1 means you got to win 9 games in a row, assuming you beat New Mexico in week 1. So, that is, for a while there, they play like a pretty tough team. I would say a tough game every 2 weeks between Oklahoma, at Nebraska, the game at USC. It's still tough to win on the West Coast for some of the reasons why, Washington had trouble away last year going to the Midwest. And I believe I had the stat. It was 6 wins only by Big Ten teams crossing 2 time zones last year.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And 4 or 5 of them were 3 or 4 of them were by Oregon, and a couple of them were teams going at UCLA. So it's tough, man. It just is. I don't know what it is about it, whether it's the travel, which has gotten so much better over the years, the time zone change, just the grind of the season. Some of it, you weren't going to win anyway if you're, a big underdog, something like that. So that helps skew it. But that'll be a challenge. So you never know. As you said, with Illinois and Indiana last year, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought those would be 2 losses on Michigan's schedule. But especially considering Indiana had beaten Michigan like once in 40 years. But there we were, in some of those venues, walking out of there covering a Michigan loss. So we'll see what these teams end up being. But I agree. At least the end of the schedule looks really manageable. You have a bye week in November, but you also play Purdue. That's another bye week, I think, this year. And then Northwestern at Wrigley is going to have more Michigan fans than Northwestern. And last time I was out at Maryland 2 years ago, albeit it was Michigan going for their 1,000th win, there were more Michigan fans than Maryland fans. So there's a chance that November heading into Ohio State allows you to, get healthy, maybe get in a groove a little bit and take a shot at 5 straight against the Buckeyes.
You guys might very well be the nail in the coffin of Mike Loxley and the Maryland run. We have not, especially me, have not been high. We did our power rankings, and I put Maryland at 18. I put Purdue above them. At least with Purdue, there's hope because the only person you're bringing back on Purdue is Devin Mockabee, and that is the guy they have back, plus new head coach. There's some at least hope, right? Again, hope springs eternal. I don't know what there's hope with Maryland. So Michigan may put the nail in the coffin of Mike Loxley, and that might send him packing after that. Because I think their last game of the season is Penn State again. Oh, God. And we know what's going to happen in that one.
Franklin runs it up on them, yeah.
It might just be lights out. See you later on that one.
Yeah. Nothing like wrapping up the Michigan talk with a little Mike Loxley. Clayton, before we let you get out of here and enjoy that beautiful scenic background behind you there, sir, let our listeners know where they can find your work and what you guys are working on here over the next month or so heading into the start of camp.
Yeah, appreciate that opportunity. I would just say head to thewolverine.com. As we mentioned at the top, we're on the On3 network, so a ton of good recruiting stuff. Michigan has had a ton of momentum on the recruiting trail. I'm headed to Las Vegas in a couple of weeks for Big Ten Media Day. I hope it's not 120 degrees. Maybe it's 112, something like that. Very comfortable 112, dry heat. But, yeah, we're going to have a ton of content from that. Fall camp coming up. Should have a bunch of reports from practice and in the game, and we got a promo code right now. UM1 gets you 2 months of access for $1, so that takes you into the season through, as of today, the Oklahoma game for just $1. So why not sign up and become a part of our community?
Absolutely. Well, I have one more question for Clayton, if he'll give me the 30 seconds. We asked Anthony last year, and he didn't give us an answer. So I'm pushing the question from last year to this year. What is your favorite or the best pizza spot in or around Michigan's campus?
Okay, I'm a little like, why did he not give an answer? But for me, it's pretty obvious. It is Joe's Pizza.
Yes,
I'm
there we
I'm
go.
a fan of New York style. The owner's a member of us over at the Wolverine.com. That's not why, though. I loved it before I even knew that. Big Michigan fan that he is. But yeah, I got to go with Joe's. But and there's not terribly great pizza in Ann Arbor. I guess maybe
I'm with
the
you.
style.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's tough, but I'd go with Joe's pretty hands down.
If you have pull with him, can you get him to open a store that is not on campus? Because I too love Joe's. I hate
I
going
agree
to
with
get
that.
it. And then
Oh,
the
I
delivery
agree.
fee is just, it's like, I'm not paying DoorDash $12 to deliver this to Pittsfield Township. Like, no, thank you.
You can't park anywhere in Ann Arbor. You have to
No.
like pay to get takeout. It takes like an hour. It's terrible. Yeah.
And they're like doing construction right across the street now. So I think the last time I went to go get it, I ended up going the wrong way down a one-way street. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care. No, just pull me over. I don't give a shit. The
I know
ticket's
what
cheaper
one-way
than the
you're talking
takeout
about, yeah.
price.
Yeah, that's fair.
The one time I got Joe's, we were on our way back from vacation from South Haven. I told my wife, I was like, listen, I don't know when I'm going to get to be in the big house for a game. That is on my bucket list. But I'm like, let's at least go visit, walk around. So we ate Joe's Pizza just on the little hill down from the stadium. We actually saw Jim Harbaugh. Didn't get to meet him, but he was out and about. I think Michigan was doing some type of this was in August, right before the season started. So it looked like family members were there with the players. But Joe's was superb. We absolutely loved it.
It's great.
It's my go-to. All right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us as we talk about the Michigan Wolverines this fine Monday afternoon. If you are watching on YouTube, you can watch us again on YouTube tonight. We are talking to Ryan Burns covering the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I don't know when I'm going to put these out on the internet, so I will figure that out after we leave here. So thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll see you tonight.